That's right. We have a prince coming on board. This is going to be phenomenal. So give me 1 minute to gather myself because I'm so giddy about it. But we do have the prince coming on board who's also a very tech driven. And we're going to have my good friend, my new good friend, Merlin Hay, who's the 24th Earl of Erroll, coming on shortly too. But we're going to start up with the prince in 1 minute.
Hi.
There you are. All right.
Yes. Does it work? You hear me?
I hear you perfectly. Robert, maybe we want to take off the slide and let's go right into it. Here we go. So I'm good old American. I don't know exactly how to address you, sir, but maybe you can introduce yourself and then I will catch on.
Okay, well, my name is Constantijn van Oranje, and I lead Tech Leap in the Netherlands, and it's our ambition to make the Netherlands a leader in Europe in tech and startups, and so far we are doing a relatively good job. I think the Netherlands is the kind of third ecosystem in Europe, behind London and now Stockholm. But we are ahead of Paris and Berlin, and powering forward.
Well, it's just an honor to have you here, and I've read a lot about Tech Leap, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about that because we here in New York and working with several people around the world on building tech hubs and creating opportunities for people to create businesses and startups and really try to create that ecosystem that's going to help all of us. How's it going over there? Like, given what you're committed to through techleap.nl, how are you measuring your success? What's going on with how's the reaction inside of the communities that you're serving? Just give us a little more insight about Tech Leap.
So we're measuring our success on a number of KPIs. That's volume in venture capital, investment, ticket sizes, ability to fill vacancies. So that's the availability of say IT expertise, and we're looking at diversity as well of the tech ecosystem, and basically a whole set of KPIs around capital, talent, technology, and markets, basically. So how do our companies internationalize? Netherlands is a small market. That's a very important factor. Do our companies actually have the ability to go abroad and capture larger markets like the US or Europe? And Europe is mostly Germany, obviously, and France. So that's some of those factors. Obviously, we can't influence 100%, but we can do everything, at least in our power, to make sure that companies have the right skill set, but also the right market environment to grow.
And so you mentioned sort of the worldwide touch that it can have. What are you doing with the United States? We certainly want to get a part of this. So tell me what you're doing with the U.S. and maybe even New York particularly. What type of relationships you got going on there?
Well, we have people on the ground in Silicon Valley that help with introductions, and so companies that go over to speak to investors, to speak to potential partners as they move to the U.S. market. And we're still developing a lot of that, how to ensure that they get the right legal advice, how to provide soft landing support. And we also have people in the that's in the embassy that are in New York, in Boston, supporting entrepreneurs as well. And obviously we have people that want to help American companies that want to establish themselves in Europe and want to come to the Netherlands and help them have the best possible experience as they're expanding into Europe. So it goes both ways.
Silicon Valley. By the way, we're Silicon Harlem. So, maybe there's a way we can, isn't
Silicon
there?
is everywhere.
And I'm sure you're familiar with Harlem, right? So we can have a Harlem to Harlem. We actually work with a lot of folks over there. We've been very much having some good collaboration with some of the colleagues out there in the Netherlands. In fact, one of my good friends is going to be speaking later today on mobility. Talks about how the Netherlands has been so, progressive and inclusive in terms of mobility. So we're trying to make sure we are connecting with you. How do you forge these international relationships? For example, Silicon Harlem, how we can become much more a part of your ecosystem?
Well, I think it's all about relationships and about companies finding some relevant proposition in that country. So either they want to go to that market and they find a good place to establish themselves. They might want to be close to a certain customer, or it's very practical. I think I don't really believe in these kind of high level MOUs where between cities or between countries with lofty objectives. It's usually around people. So if you have good people on the ground that know the companies and know the investors and bring them together, maybe around certain events, but on the whole, it's really it's a not very scalable people's job. But that's the fun part, actually. It's between people, and it's sad that we don't get to meet each other anymore because of this stupid virus. But I really believe that you need to forge ties and then start building that out, and on those relationships, companies can then establish themselves, and they draw in other companies, and they become the role models for the next generation. So it's a very it's a people's business.
Well, I couldn't agree more with that. That means a lot to us to have real relationships, not just on paper. And well, actually, to that point, is there any way I could be king of the Netherlands? I'm just kidding. Let me keep moving here.
Yeah, I mean, we used to have revolutions and that. So we had a French king. So why not one from Harlem, New York?
That's what I'm talking about. Everybody on this call, let's push me into that king position. Let me ask you about the future. As you think about the future in the Netherlands, but around the world, where are we headed? I mean, I agree with you. This crazy COVID, which has made such an impact on every neighborhood, every household, every city and state and country. Like, how do you see us not only coming out of this morass, but also just how do you see the future of, technology, of all this remote working? How do you particularly see that?
So I'm going to just do the positive side of this, right? I'm not going to go into tensions between Asia and the US and the politics and many of the social strife that we're seeing, because that's all happening as well. What I'm seeing in technology is that COVID has moved certain trends that were out there for a long time, like remote healthcare, remote education, food delivery, e-commerce, all these things right to our doorstep. And those things have been around for 20 years, and somehow systems have have a lot of legacy and a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of vested interest that kind of stopped those innovations actually to come to the market. And now we're seeing them come in with an incredible pace. And I think we're going to see more of that. And this is right on the cusp of a transition in energy, a transition in food, a transition in digital, and then there are a number of technologies that are right out there, like AI and genomics, and then there's a next wave of technologies coming around quantum computing, etc. So we're in this incredible technological age, and now because of COVID, a lot of this is really accelerating. And it depends if you have the companies and the capital to really capitalize on that development. And I do see that, actually. I see that many startups are more on trend than legacy companies. So because they have to do something new, they've been betting on new ways of working, new ways of getting our healthcare, are providing education, and they're actually quite well positioned now. So as long as there is capital to fund their growth, I actually see that a lot of incredible innovations could come out of this period. Obviously, as well, we're seeing a lot of job losses, and we're seeing a lot of tragedy on that side as well. And it has to force us to think about, how do we deal with that as a society? How do we make sure that these innovations actually not only benefit investors and entrepreneurs, but also benefit society as a whole? And we're seeing this now, especially on the skills side. Many people losing their jobs, needing new 21st century skills. And how do we actually support them in transitioning to those new kind of jobs? That's, I think, a big challenge. But this is an innovation wave that was waiting to happen for years already, and it's now really being accelerated. And it's really up to us to make it work for the good.
Thank you for sharing that. That's actually quite inspirational, looking towards that type of future. But part of that future, even though we don't want to get too deep into it, I'd love for you to stay on for a little longer as we bring Merlin Hay on. But the thing that I'm really curious about, I'll talk with him as well about, is policy. And how are we working with the electives and and the politicians that are shaping sort of that future? What I know you probably don't like politics that much. Maybe you do, but how do you look at that in terms of a lot of the people that are in those positions may not even have much of a tech background? How do you look at that?
Well, it's a challenge because so much is happening at such a pace, and many of our politicians and many people in government have not been educated in technology, and so and understanding technology is one thing. So we work a lot with entrepreneurs, and they understand technology, but understanding policy around technology is yet a whole new thing. So we've seen a business model develop around platforms, and now we've seen that after basically 15 years, the regulators are slowly trying to grasp with what this means for competition, what this means for access to information, to privacy, to all these kind of things. And so it takes a while before you kind of understand how to intervene in a way that doesn't lead to market distortions and that leads to more positive outcomes. Very often, if you want to intervene, with kind of old political instruments or regulatory instruments, you might do more damage than you do good because a lot of innovation gets blocked. So no, it's not easy. It's not easy, but I do think we're seeing in the US after the hearings with the large tech companies, and we're seeing in Europe as well that regulators are now kind of trying to figure out how to deal with these issues. But I think it stays important that we don't only look at how we regulate, but also how we enable and how we ensure that we have continuously new companies coming into the market, that we don't just look at this from a regulatory standpoint, and because that's a bit old world. So we have to find new ways to deal with this.
Okay, well, it makes a lot of sense. I know I don't have you for very long, so I'm going to ask you if you could just, give us a couple of quick nuggets you want this audience to know about not only your work with TechLeap, but anything of inspiration for the audience here. If you can stay on a little longer with Merlin Hay, that's great. If you got to go, we understand. We don't every day get a prince in our meetups. So this is so exciting for us. So your final
royalty is overrated. So.
Well, I'll take that. Let's switch places. Anyway, go ahead, Constantijn. Give your final comment.
No, it's. I think what is really important is that entrepreneurs take their dreams and their lives in their own hands, and they build new things, create new jobs, and it's really up to up to politicians to allow entrepreneurship to really flourish. And we are now in an incredible moment where that entrepreneurship can come from anywhere, anywhere in the world, with current IT, and that it's really up to those people in power to allow the empowerment of others, and the empowerment comes through entrepreneurship, and that's something I really stand by. And I also think that it's not just for certain elites, but it should be broadly shared through society. And entrepreneurship is really the way to move up on the social ranks, and that should be enabled. So I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be on your program. And I know that you've been working with fellow countrymen of mine in the past as well. And obviously, as you mentioned, Harlem in the Netherlands is also trying to become a tech hub near to Amsterdam. And there are Formula One circuits, so we're trying to kind of go along in developments and be part of global movements, and in some ways Harlem in the Netherlands looks up to Harlem in New York, with how you and in Silicon Harlem, but also Silicon Alley, you have been pushing technology and building incredible companies. So I hope we find ways to collaborate, and you inspire us. I hope that we can inspire you too.
Thank you, Constantijn, and my best to you and your family. And we hope that we can continue this conversation moving forward. I'm going to transition here. In the meantime, please feel free to stay on, or I know you got things to do, but I really appreciate that time. Now, Robert, what do we got here? Oh, the Duke of Earl. That's all right. Merlin, put that video on and unmute yourself. You heard your theme music come on in our introduction here.
Yes, I've had that before in the States. They were a great group.
So
anyway,
thank you for being here, and we are extremely honored to have you here. Coming right out of the House of Lords. You're dealing also in that transition that I just had with Prince Constantijn about, policy, and you and I had this conversation a little bit. Talk a little bit about how you see the role of electives and politicians in terms of technology moving forward.
It's a difficult one, because the trouble is that it's always behind. It's always behind the curve, and particularly at the moment when things are changing so fast. I used to write software as well, and I always liked developing things. I worked at the smaller end of things. I started when the first 8-bit computers came out of California, and that's when I really started writing software a bit more seriously, solving business problems, because I was interested in how they could make people's lives easier. And they can be useful, but they can also slow things up hugely. But the trouble I find is that my contemporaries, and for quite a bit behind after that, they don't really get it. They're sort of slightly frightened by it. They're always behind the curve, and they feel slightly threatened by it. And they're always trying to make things super safe. But of course, you can never predict the future, so you can't make everything super safe. You can't guarantee anything. And governments particularly suffer from this inertia. And then they're not good at entering into good contracts. And the big systems integrators, people run rings around them. And therefore, the moment you hear that it's not some innovative people doing the new design work, you know that you're in for another disaster, because their model is to make it overcomplicated, wait for it to break, which will be quite quickly, and then get paid a fortune to solve the problem. But they don't want to solve it, because then they're out of a job again. Whereas look at something small. If you look at the internet, you've just seen the man who, one helper, wrote the TCP/IP protocols which drive the internet, and most of us still running on the test system IPv4. But that was designed from the mind and imagination of one person, and that's how very many of the best systems. The bigger the committee, the worse it is. But anyway, policy is very difficult, therefore, because by the time you get around to make a decision about it, among a whole lot of people who don't know much about it, the world's moved on. Certainly, the world of the internet, of IT, of what's possible technologically. You know, they're still trying to get their heads around IoT when we're moving into being able to control factories remotely with 5G networks in a box, as involved in Hyper 5 initiative. And with 3D printing, you could have people putting in designs, powering machines separately elsewhere, using AR, VR goggles for the designs they want to be watching the machines producing it and correcting it on the fly from 1,000 miles away while it's all going on. And all that's possible now. We can do those sort of things. And that's not just the internet. The internet's just a carrier for all of this. Anyway.
Well, I'm very impressed, first of all, with your tech chops. I mean, it's really good to have someone who's in power of yourself that actually knows what all of us are on this call about. And by the way, that individual, Vince Cerf, mentioned you this morning. He saw that
I was listening to him.
Oh, good, good, yeah. So I spilled the beans that you told me about the cab ride, and he remembered it fondly. So I'm glad that you got a chance to hear that.
No, I've been wandering around the house with my my noise cancelling headphones on, and you coming over on this thing as well in the background.
That's nice. Yeah, now we're talking here.
Yeah.
All right. So
I can have you in stereo, glorious stereo.
Let me ask you, as you look at the sort of the international sort of way that we're all sort of embracing technology, do you think there's going to be a sort of movement towards a worldwide sort of initiative or set of protocols, or is this still going to be very much segmented and every country does their own thing, or every city, or how do you see that evolving?
It's difficult because part of the inherent basic design of the internet protocols, I'm not here to talk about the browsers and the things right over the top of the basic thing that Vince wrote, is resilience. And it can go from the East Coast to the West Coast of America via China or right around the world. It was built so that if you blew up the entire communication infrastructure in the middle, it could still get through. So there's a lot of chat, for instance, about is Huawei safe, for instance, and could they be looking at everything? Well, for goodness sake, everything out there, once it's gone out through the carriers on the internet, could end up anywhere, and so therefore you have to assume that it is insecure. Your only security is the end-to-end encryption. Therefore, also, it's very difficult to control. China particularly tried to put a sort of walled garden, a wall around it, but there's still too many ways around it and ways of getting past it if you know what you're doing. And we saw that also in the time of the Arab Spring, and we see this repeatedly. Because the interesting thing is that, the countries that want to say that we should be controlling these for the greater good also disagree with which countries they think are good and which are bad. So they also always want to enable getting information out of what they call the bad countries, while they want to help protect the good countries. The trouble is, half the world thinks one lot's good, and the other half of the world think that same lot's bad. And so they're never going to agree with it. And I think that this whole thing about having a certain amount of freedom and resilience, and it will never be controlled completely, I don't think. Well, I hope it won't. I think it'd be terrible the way when we have controlled lives. I don't like people controlling my life.
Well, I'm with you on that. I guess another follow-up question would be, do you think that connectivity and internet access is, and there's been a couple of people that have asked this question, is somewhat of a human right type of thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed Harvey Newman's been popping up questions on the side there.
Yes.
And so we were discussing this, funny, about 3 or 4 years ago here, and even further ago, I was talking about the stages about the second Internet Governance Forum in Rio. We were several of us talking about trying to do a Charter of Human Rights for the internet. But it's like all those things, it's very hard to get it off the ground. It's very hard to get people to agree. Everyone's got different things that they find immoral or offensive. And the moment you get into those sort of things, and this comes into, someone was also asking a question about censorship earlier. And I hit this, funny enough, when I was speaking in one of the Arab countries at a seminar. And it's about when that whole blow up with the Danish cartoon came up, where the Muslims took huge offense against it because it depicted Muhammad in a very bad light. God rest his soul. And you've got to be very careful what you say, because when I said it was I better not say, because I will offend some people probably now, but I referred to the cartoon as not being very advisable. And that was taken because I, in the same sentence, used the name of the prophet and also used this adjective, was taken as hugely offensive. And someone wanted to arrest me immediately and chuck me on an airplane out of the country. And it's very difficult to know. And societies should have some right to protect themselves, but who decides what they should protect? And that's the hardest thing. Someone in the thing put a hand up and said, well, only democratic countries should be allowed to do that. Well, how democratic is which country? I mean, we elect parliament for 5 years and then they're dictators for 5 years until we get the next election.
Wow.
Well, to a certain extent. I mean, it's a bit of an extreme opinion, that, I suppose, but it ain't. So, you know what I mean?
I do. Well, there's certainly sometimes, depending on where you're at on the spectrum of politics, it could feel like a lifetime for some leaders. Do
you know something I'd want to say very quickly, which was very interesting in the early discussion, and particularly Jessica from the FCC?
Yes,
and some of the things you're talking about, the connectivity issues, the lack of connectivity, etc. We have exactly the same problems over here, and I think a lot of most countries. And you know, we're trying to do this universal service obligation, we say, but they're talking about sort of 98% as a top target. Well, hang on. If I'm about to take 2% of the house, and they're doing it by households, that means 400,000 households never going to be connected up. And it means about 1 million people, therefore, not being connected properly. Overstating connections. BT are very good at rigging the figures, etc. Here, we have issues whereby, in order not to destroy their market base for businesses, we're doing things where we're forcing them or giving lots of money to get residential connections. But if you're a small business operating from residential address, they suddenly say, no, we won't connect you. We won't give you fiber to the home. And there's a lot of things like that. And the point that came up then later about people slip into poverty because they can't get connected. And it perpetuates that poverty. Because as I said, the children are locked out of education and they're locked out of medicine because so much is online now. And we've got to become aware of that as policymakers. We have to do something about it.
We're very U.S. centric, but I guess I'm not surprised in a lot of ways that we're not the only country that hasn't, connected everyone. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. As I always say, as you heard me might have said with the commissioner, is that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like you have to lose to help somebody else. And in fact, it's just the opposite. We're interconnected. So for us to go, it's okay if 20-30% of people don't have a connection. No, that's not a good idea. So I appreciate what you're saying. Why don't you move us towards some of your final thoughts here, things that you think Americans should be thinking about, particularly Silicon Harlem here, as you've got to know me a little bit and you're hearing some of the sentiments about what we do. Would love to hear your own sort of perspective on us and what we should be thinking about, from you.
Well, I think because you're trying to also influence the policymakers and trying to get the right environment to move forwards. And I think it always has to be done by incentives rather than by controls. The trouble is the rule makers and the policymakers tend to think of trying to control it by rule, like the target I just mentioned. What you really need to do is to have the right incentives to make people improve their behavior, companies and corporations and everyone improve their behavior in a direction that you want society to go. And I think that's one of the key things that I've learned. Force and shouting at people doesn't really work. I think
only in New York.
Well, it doesn't, you know, if you're trying to really get things to growth, and your innovation will come from your smaller businesses, your smaller enterprises. The big boys don't get it. They don't do it. They're too hidebound. They're like a large bureaucratic organization. It's got to come from your entrepreneurial dreamers and visionaries. That's where it's got to come from. The trouble, most of them can't sell. And they've got to sell to make money to get away. But that's one of the things. I think the other thing is, I think that privacy is more important than people think. And Alicia was interesting her, because I know she's doing a whole lot of stuff with Wishnish about the using DAG, which is a form of blockchain, to do things to help privacy, etc. And that's always worth thinking about, because you can't trust others necessarily with their information. But and the government has huge inertia. That's the problem. It's how do we get things moving faster? Anyway, but one of the things I think we've left the Model T forward stage, I think, of the internet now, and we're probably around this sort of the earlier saloon cars and things that broke down regularly. You never knew if you'd finish your journey quite. But I bet you in 5 years' time, or possibly less, we'll be looking back and thinking, why were we having all that trouble then?
No, I think you're right. And first of all, I hope. Let me say this: we know we're under COVID-19 and all this other crazy stuff, but I hope next year. I hope you like New York, because I'm going to get you to come here to New York, spend some time with us here in New York, and really chop it up, where we can have you at one of our events and really have the community galvanize around you and just have these conversations. For everyone on the call, Merlin is just so accessible, so smart, and he has a great sense of humor. So he's the kind of guy that'll fit right in with New York and particularly with Harlem. Merlin, hey, I hope that you would consider coming and hanging out with us in New York.
Certainly, love to. I'd love to. Particularly the clubs in Harlem, I believe, are great.
That's good. Don't tell us too many secrets here, Merlin. Hey, we'll run with that. But yeah, we'll look forward to it. And I just wanted to say to you that, based on, these conversations, the conversations I've had before with you, it's just an honor and a pleasure to have you join, and that others could experience what I've experienced. And we're behind you, whatever we can do. I hope you stay on a little bit longer. We've got some more people coming on, including the CTO of New York City, John Paul Farmer. So we're really excited for his remarks. And right after this, we're going to start up with Rhonda Benda, who's been just an amazing supporter of Silicon Harlem, and she's an extraordinary leader around pushing cities forward. So it's a small introduction for Rhonda, but she's more than capable to take care of this next panel. And I'm so happy that Ottaviano is on there, who we've been reading about a lot. And how about that? The Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer J.J. Snow of the United States Air Force. So we've got a tremendous panel here. And again, thank you to both Prince Constantine and Duke of Erroll. Very good, Merlin Erroll. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Run.